Šīs ir pieci.
Lorde un Tīm bez 20 minūtēm 9. piekdienā 25. aprīlī šeit loģiski Pieci.lv. Un mums ir īpašs ciemiņš Nicholas Kralevs. Ir diplomātijas, pasaules ceļojumu un arī pasaules notikumu eksperts, kurš šodien ir ieradies Rīgā. Un jau pavisam drīz 9:30 sāksies seminārs par to, kā kļūt par īstu žurnālistu 21. gadsimtā, kad ik viens, kurš atvērs savu blogu, var uzskatīt, ka ir žurnālists. Un es noprotu, Uldi, ka vēl ir iespēja pieteikties, vai ne, uz pēdējā brīdī.
Jā. Pieteikšanās vēl apmēram pusstundu, un mēs varam nosaukt arī telefonu, pa kuru var zvanīt, lai pieteiktos.
20398689, nu gadījumā tas, ko jūs tūlīt dzirdēsiet, jūs interesēs. 20398689. Tātad 9:30 līdz pat 1:00 dienā Čarlstonas konferenču zālē Blaumaņielā. Šodien Nicholas Kralevs stāstīs par žurnālistiku 21. gadsimtā. Good morning, Nicholas. And good morning. How are you?
Well, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you very much. So, as you have done so many things in your professional career, it makes it difficult to put in few words what you are actually doing, what's your profession. So, what do you do nowadays, and how do you call yourself?
Well, my profession is a journalist. Although when you start writing books, I suppose you become an author as well. And I've written 2 books, but I've always considered myself a journalist, so I guess that will be it.
Is this your first time in Riga?
No, third.
All right. What have you done in past here?
I've come to cover various things. So back in 2002, which was, I think, when I came both times, it had to do with NATO enlargement. So that was just before you were invited to join NATO.
Okay. Where have you been born, and what was your career in brief till this moment? If you have to put it like in 140 characters.
No, I don't like the 140 characters, but I was born in Bulgaria, and then I went to the US when I was 22.
Okay.
But I'd already begun working as a journalist. In fact, I started when I was 19.
Okay.
And I was a reporter on the evening news of at the time, the only one national TV network in Bulgaria.
And when you are in Bulgaria and you're 19 years old, how can you make like international career?
Well, you go to college, you get accepted to the American university.
Okay.
And then you get a full scholarship.
Okay.
Because imagine, this is 96.
Okay.
And it was almost impossible to have the money to spend on in an American university. So that's what I did. I got a full scholarship, and then after graduation, I worked for a year in New York, which was in financial news and market news. Wasn't very prestigious, wasn't very well paid, but I needed just a year before I went to graduate school to get a master's degree,
okay.
Which was at Harvard. And in the meantime, I just did internships just to prove that I could write. And through those internships, in fact, I got my first full-time job. And at the same time, actually, while I was at Harvard, where I went to graduate school, I started writing for the Financial Times. And I did that for 3 years. And I suppose once you've done that, then it's very clear whether you can write and what stories you can write and what ideas you can come up with and what people you can interview. And so what I wanted to do was cover foreign policy, cover the US State Department and the Secretary of State, and travel with the Secretary of State. And so that's what I did. I covered 4 Secretaries of State, beginning with Madeleine Albright, and then Colin Powell and Condoleezza Rice, and finally Hillary Clinton, and then I left my job to write my books.
Okay, and you are here to give some tips on journalism today. Am I right?
Well, I don't know if I'm here to give tips on journalism. I don't want to necessarily lecture people on what they should or could do. I am visiting 5 countries in Central and Eastern Europe.
Okay, it's like a tour for you.
Talking mostly about American diplomacy and what the United States is trying to do globally from a journalist's perspective. I don't work for the American government and I don't speak for the American government, but as a journalist covering for US foreign policy, I several years ago, decided to figure out what exactly it is that American diplomats do why they do it, how it affects the lives of people in the United States and in other countries, which is what my book's about. My latest book is about. And so that's mainly the reason for my tour, is to talk about that book and the global diplomacy that the United States is engaged in.
Okay. Your visit is happening at the same time that 150 US soldiers have arrived in Latvia, and they will do some military training. And at the same time, Subways are going to reopen the first restaurant here in Riga. So is it
It's
just
all connected. It's a conspiracy.
Is it just coincidence? Because yeah. Can you tell me?
Well, do you suppose the troops was sent to protect me? Or the opening of Subway? Obviously the decision on the troops was made very recently in response to certain events that are happening that I really have nothing to do with. And I didn't even know that Subway was opening a location here. So I was the only one who chose the dates for my visit, and they were not influenced by anybody else.
Okay. You have written the book about air travel and your theories and Kralev, the Kralev method. Can it work somewhere outside the US as well? Because I was reading just like a short brief about the whole thing, and I was thinking, okay, here you don't get miles when you buy your groceries, for example. But yeah, tell me about that.
Well, the book is mostly about airfares. The airline system and the airfare system around the world is the same, meaning there is an organization of airlines. It's called IATA. It's based in Geneva, and every member of that organization, every airline in the world, it doesn't matter what country it's in, abides by certain rules of publishing airfares, structuring ticket prices. And so it is a science, and I wrote a book because it's not easy to explain in a minute or two or five. And I know that people like to give tips and give top 10, top 5, whatever, but that's just misleading, because the airlines have made the system so complex, hoping that you won't learn it and won't figure out what they're doing to overprice tickets and to make you pay more than you should be paying. And so I learned it by doing it as a journalist covering, whether it was at the Financial Times or then the Washington Times. I've been to 91 countries. And so half of my travels when I was at the Washington Times were with, as you said, with the Secretary of State, on the plane with the Secretary of State, but half of them were commercially. And so I had a very small budget. I wanted to make more trips on the same budget, and I learned the system by doing it, asking questions. There were no books at the time. Nobody was teaching this. So I would call an airline and talk to agents on the phone and ask, why is this? What does this code mean? Okay. Why is this letter this way? What does that number mean? And so once I learned that, then it was easy for me. Just, if I look at a code which has 4 letters and 2 or 3 numbers in it, that to you probably will mean nothing.
Okay.
But I know immediately what it means. And so then I try to, once I've figured out what is the absolute lowest published fare between 2 cities, doesn't matter whether it's US or Latvia or Germany or China, then I have to make sure that I get that absolute lowest fare. And when an airline tries to overcharge me, then I can see what they're doing, and then I know what to do to reverse that. So it's a science, and if you can beat them at their own game, then you can get the price you deserve.
Okay, but after you have written this book, is it still possible for you to get the best fares? Because I think if I was an airline and you would go to make a booking, I will say, this is the dude who wrote the book.
Well, no, because I'm not doing anything wrong.
Okay.
I'm not breaking any rules. I'm following the rules very strictly. It's just the point, the difference between me and most people who travel is that they don't know the system. And they are just paying whatever the website or an airline tells them to pay. And the airline systems are programmed, in fact, to overcharge you. Or it's actually, they're not hiding this. Mm-hmm. They have more computer models that are aimed to what's called to maximize revenue.
Okay.
That means to get as much money out of you as possible that you would be willing to pay. They don't hide that. They actually write press releases about this. So nobody's come to me. I mean, I know people at airlines, but No, of course, I've been using this for years, and that's, I wanted other people to be using it and to help them. So I haven't had any problems with that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, back to journalism. You just said, mentioning a book, that people make top 10 lists and short stuff, and it's kind of hard to make people read the book. Maybe some tips for journalists, how to make people read longer stuff, because internet, as we mentioned, 140 characters and that's it. And good journalism.
Well, the good news is that you can write several tweets of 140 characters. Don't have to put everything in one tweet. But I haven't written a book about how to become a journalist or a good journalist, but there's some fundamental things that journalists have been taught, at least in the States, for a long time, that still apply even in this era of 24/7 and social media and 140 character tweets. And this is actually even more applicable today, because we were always told about the importance of a headline, for example. And traditionally, in the American media and the Western media, including in Britain, reporters don't like headlines. So when I worked at, whether it was the Washington Times or the Financial Times, I did not write a headline. I could suggest it, but there is a copy desk, a separate part of the newspaper where people would write the headline. Now, the reason for that is that most people would only read the headline. That's it. So if you're not capable of grabbing them and getting their attention with a headline, then nobody would read the story. So there's been research in the States of what the percentage of people how many percent read the headline and then read the first sentence or the lead of the story, the first paragraph. And it's something like less than 10% of the people who read the headline would read the entire story, less than 10%. So you need to figure out how to grab them with the headline and with the lead of the story to see if they will read it. Now, sometimes the story might be about a subject that you just couldn't care less. I mean, I'm really not that interested in sports. Okay. There's really rarely a story about sports that can grab me. But for the most part, that's it. Headline, lead.
Okay.
Is it nowadays too a copy desk who writes headlines, or now?
Still, it's at the big newspapers. Now with the web, sometimes when I was, for example, at the Washington Times, I would file stories during the day or updates. Let's say I'm traveling with Hillary Clinton, and it's 12 hours ahead of Washington in Singapore, for example, or in Hong Kong, and then the paper for today, the deadline's already gone, the paper's done, but there's still almost 20 hours until the paper the next day, so I need to file stories for the web. Because the copy desk is, asleep at 1 o'clock in the morning or 2 o'clock in the morning, then I would write a headline. Now, there is an editor in Washington who's a web editor on the website who might want to write it. But for the most part, because I'm there with the secretary and I know the subject and the topics, and I am an expert on what I'm writing about, then and there are no space constraints, because newspaper is always, imagine your story in the newspaper is just one column, that's it, and you have that space in one column to write a headline. So you have to write 3 or 4 words, but they have to be short enough to fit in that one column. On the web, there is no such restriction. So then the headlines written by the reporter will be more acceptable.
Okay, and at the end, I just wanted to ask you, as you are as well expert on world affairs, do you have any prognosis what's going to happen in next few months here in this part?
I do, but it's a secret.
Why? Why it's a secret then?
Well, if anybody pretends to know or claims to know, I wouldn't believe them, because clearly Russia and the West are not on the same page. I mean, that now we're learning that that's been the case for many years, and that the West, including the United States, meaning the governments in those countries, have been terribly misreading the Russian president and his intentions. So I think they're now in a period where they're trying to adjust their policies, because for more than a decade, the West has been trying to make Russia a partner, not an enemy. And we're now seeing that apparently the Russian president has decided to make an enemy out of the United States, because looks like it's just easier for him to win support at home for his policies, and it's easier to make foreign policy if there is an enemy. It's very difficult to make foreign policy if there is no enemy. And so, because of this now, I think the Western governments will have to adjust their policies in response to Russia.
Yeah, and this surprise, could we say that it looks a little bit like the West's reaction is a little bit weak for now?
And slow. I think it's exactly because of this. I think they were surprised. It takes time, first of all, to come up with a sound policy. It takes even longer when you want to make sure that as the United States, that you're on the same page with the EU, because the EU is, a complicated organization. It takes time to do anything in the EU, and so the other thing you want is to come up with a policy that would work.
Okay.
And I agree that it's taking a bit longer than maybe. But again, who's to say? Because of the 24/7 news cycle, we now expect quick decisions and immediate responses. And maybe I've never been a policymaker. I've never been a government official. So before I criticize, I think carefully what I would do if I were in that position. But I understand people now have been killed. Now it's not just about a threat or annexing a territory. Now it's about people's lives, and people have died, as we know in recent days. So yes, I know they feel the pressure of acting more quickly than they have been. And you mentioned the troops, but however symbolic that, they already arrived in Poland. They're about to arrive in Estonia and Lithuania as well. And you were the first of the Baltic countries where they arrived, as far as I know. And probably. I don't know whether whatever policy that the West comes up with would be the right policy immediately. But I think eventually they'll get it right.
Okay. Thank you very much, Nicholas, for doing this interview. Just one tiny last question. In the morning when you wake up, what's the first webpage you open?
Well, Google News. Because I can customize it.
Okay.
Because I can say I want the top 6 or however many foreign stories or world stories, then domestic or political stories, business, entertainment.
So
and
no
they
sports.
Can come. I don't really look at sports, but just that's just me. But it's just an aggregate,
okay,
right?
Yeah.
So there's not one newspaper or one website. As you know, Google News gathers or. Whether it's a newspaper or it could be a TV website or a radio website, could be the BBC, could be the New York Times, could be the Guardian or some paper in Australia or Japan, but it's a good place to look at all of them.
Nicholas, thank you very much for doing this interview and have a good luck with the event today.
All right, thank you.
Nicholas Kralev šorīt ciemos brokastīs jau 9:30 no rīta. Tātad, kā kļūt par īstu žurnālistu 21. gadsimtā seminārs Čarlstonā. Nu tad pēdējo reizi Ulu pasaka, kur bija jāzvan.
Zvanīt ar tālruni.
Ja vēl grib pieteikties.
Pieteikties ar 15 minūšu laikā, zvanot pa telefonu 2039 86 89.
2039
86 89.
Lieliski. Ir bez 1 minūtes 9. Labrīt!